I'm going to toss the ball to Saul Bromberger.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is great. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to hear Timothy's presentation. I first got to know about Timothy about 10 years ago. I forget how, social media or the internet. His book, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Ecolilia, came out.
Yeah.
And his portraits were just so stunning and soulful. And I started following you. I started going to your website every so often, seeing what you're up to. And I found your way of observing people in a interesting, whimsical, observational way. Like, aren't we interesting? Aren't we funny? Aren't we humorous? Look at us, people. And kind of a love of observation. And in being on your website today, I plucked this out of how you describe yourself. So I'm going to read it.
Yeah, sure.
So this is Timothy talking about himself. I'm the photographer agency's call to make empathetic photographs of things that are a little different, a little bit curious, human, humorous, and always soulful. These qualities seem to surface in every project we take on. So when I discovered him, it was a collaboration that he did with his son Eli. There was a way that they understood each other in their drawings, photographs through the filter of the autistic spectrum. And I was drawn to this project because for me, it was a project that over the years, he not only has been able to create emotional and soulful portraits of his son Eli in this book, but in his portraits, in his groups, in his personal projects. When you go to his website, it's everywhere. These soulful and very spiritual scenes that just really got to me. And these are the photographers and artists that I'm drawn to. And these are the artists that I've chosen to tell Vince about, that we should highlight in this series of lecture series. He is repped by Tidepool Reps, and he is the Associate Director of the Photo Department of the Academy of Arts in San Francisco. Timothy, thanks so much for sharing your work with us.
That was a beautiful introduction, Saul. Thank you. You put a lot of work into that. That was great. So let's see. Thank you all for coming. I talk about photography every day here in my job, but this one I was especially excited for, and it always seems new, and it always seems like there's a new audience or something like that. So I thank you all for coming. Let me let's see. The host has disabled screen sharing. So.
Did I really?
Yep, somehow.
Well, take that. Okay, Tim should be back on.
All right, let's see. Oh, that works. All right, let's see here. Present. Is that working?
Yeah, looks great.
Yes. Oh, great, great, great. My name is Timothy Archibald. So, you know, it's funny, as we put together this lecture, like I was trying to figure out what to call it. And, you know, what do people usually call their things? Like, oh, commercial and personal work, or, you know, the art of Timothy Archibald or something like that. And I wanted a title that maybe was something that we could think about. And, you know, something that's been in my brain for the past, I feel like, you know, for like a decade, but it started to solidify, is, you know, I'm really stuck on this idea that there are no bad photographs anymore, you know, and, you know, the technology with the phone and with digital, it's made it so that, like, it's very rare to see something bad. You know what I mean? Like here I teach, and you know, the students' work is just amazing and like miles beyond anything that I was doing as a student, you know, and like, I do remember that, like, to have your mind blown by a photograph, like before the internet, it's kind of like you'd have to go to the library and look up some, you know, Ansel Adams or Richard Avedon or Gary Winogrand and, you know, see the work of the greats. And you would never stumble upon an amazing photograph, you know. And then now it's like you could go to the dentist and, you know, the receptionist could say like, oh, you're a photographer. Oh, here, look at the shot I got the other day. And it would be great. You know what I mean? Like, it would be amazing. And so, you know, with all of that, and the reason I bring this up is I do feel that like the craft is gone now. It's just too easy. And it has made it so that other things have to matter now, you know, like, and whether that's the emotional connection to a subject, or it's the power of an idea, or if it's the way you arrange things. And, you know, to me, that's an idea that I feel like it's on my brain all the time. And when I was trying to assemble the work for this lecture, I thought that idea kind of echoed in a lot of the projects that, you know, later in my career surfaced and started to direct things. So keep that idea in your mind there. And maybe you agree with it, maybe you disagree with it. Like, I've shared it with my girlfriend and with other people, and they've said like, well, no, I see terrible photos all the time. But to me, I don't know. I think it's getting less and less and less. And when everything's great, then yeah, the game has to change a little bit. So I wanted to put together like this kind of introduction to my work and what it kind of quintessentially looks like. And, you know, a lot of the things that we just looked at here are commercial, you know, shoots and kind of what my work looks like these days, you know. And I guess, you know, like Saul was saying, I tried to, I feel like I want work that is human, a little bit humorous, but it's almost like the humor is getting less and less and less. And the human part is getting more and more and more, you know, these days. But as I put these together, you know, it all seems to come from understanding the power of the portrait, you know. And, you know, here is kind of the front and back of my current physical portfolio, which I still have. My agent, Brooke Embry, takes around. And on the left, we have a Holocaust survivor, and on the right, we have an autistic kid wearing Google Glass. And there was something about the similarity or just the universality of seeing these two people together. I thought there was some, you know, little connection. And is it funny? I don't think it's funny, but there's something there, you know. You know, and it's interesting. The other thing I wanted to bring up as we kind of get into this is that definitely I would love for this talk to not just be a one-sided thing. And I would encourage all your questions. And definitely in the, you know, with the personal projects I've done that we're going to get a glimpse at, you know, with my kids and stuff, I've handled every question, you know, every very hard question you can answer. And so, you know, I'd encourage everybody to dig in. If there's something you're curious about, ask. I'm very open to these things. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is my friend Thomas Broning and I, we went to see a lecture by a great photographer who I won't name, who we loved. And the lecture was exhausting because he showed like 100,000 photographs and you couldn't find the right time to leave the lecture or anything. So with that in mind, I've tried to keep this thorough, but not go on too long. But what we're looking at here is a lot of these things are commercial jobs, you know, that were done. And for me, a commercial job is I work for kind of on the high end, like pharmaceutical companies, on the more low end, just simple magazines. And I do a lot of work for universities for their internal publications. And so it's kind of a mix of these things. And, you know, I guess people identify me as a commercial photographer. And here we got the McDonald's logo to remind you, you know, commercial photographer. But really, I've never really, like, you know, enjoyed the fruits of that market. Like, for me to be working in the advertising arena, it was always like trying to back a truck that was too disheveled into a parking spot or something. Like, it was never a perfect fit, you know, and it was almost like everybody cheered when my rep would get me some big job or something like that, because it was almost like it went against the grain or something, you know. And I used to be very jealous of photographers like Eric Almas, who were at the top of the advertising game, and definitely their personal work and their advertising work all spoke the same language. And with me, the personal projects got more attention, but they weren't very commercial, and the commercial things were okay, kind of. And so, I mean, the reason I bring this up is these are the dilemmas, and I think that we all face, where like, are you commercial enough? Are you not commercial? Is your artwork so esoteric no one cares about it? Or is it so pleasing like Norman Rockwell that it has no artistic integrity, you know? So I guess I feel like I want to share my inner voice on these things, because I think it's what we all kind of struggle with. And so these are just kind of a sample of things, you know, and like this last job, which was for McDonald's, I remember the interesting thing about this, and we did this a couple years ago, these were real employees whose very first job was at McDonald's. And the campaign was called "My First Job, Not My Last Job." And I remember that the kind of, you know, word from on high was like, you can't retouch any of these pictures. They can't be retouched. The audience of McDonald's sees through retouching these days. And so everything has to look as real and, you know, acneed and pockmarked as the people truly are. And, you know, it was interesting when they brought that up. I was kind of like, oh, maybe this advertising game is changing, kind of, you know, maybe it is getting more based in like the real. And this pair I've always kind of shown together, which is, it was a story on the scientists and pseudoscientists who are trying to study living forever. And the guy on the left was the CEO of a company who was, you know, had a kind of live forever science-based philosophy. And, you know, there was something when I photographed him, and then obviously that beard was beautiful, and he was beautiful, but there was something when he closed his eyes that, oh, it did everything for me. Like suddenly it was a simple little thing the subject could do that changed everything. And he wasn't just looking at me. And to me, it almost seemed like he was thinking about living forever, or he was like waking up from sleeping for 100 years, or there was something where like this simple little gesture did something. And I think in a lot of my work that seems to work, it's a lot of times a simple little thing that pushes it from a normal boring photograph to something that could like trigger your imagination, you know. And I thought that one kind of worked in that way. You know, and as I'm trying to put this together, you know, here I'm 54. I've been taking pictures since I was 14, you know, and you go through different phases. And, you know, there was a period where I was really marketing myself as the funny photographer. Like the person who would look at things in a funny way, or would have funny things happening in the photograph. And, you know, this is a series I did with a stylist who I worked with a lot, Shannon Amos, a Bay Area stylist. And we kind of created this work to look like advertising work that was, you know, definitely had a stylist voice to it. And we found a location and cast it with models, and the stylist created the wardrobe. And there was always a sense of storytelling, but a little bit of sense of humor, you know, in these as well. And they're very elaborate, they're very theatrical. I enjoyed collaborating and learning how to collaborate, you know, with these things. This was an extension of that series. I remember at the time, somehow we found the school on another kind of commercial job I was doing, but it reminded me of the school that I went to from kindergarten through 12th grade in Schenectady, New York, that had the blackboards, and it had the dusty chalk, and it had those colored walls. And so finding this, I mean, it's just a superficial kind of creation type of photograph, but it did suddenly become kind of touched on a bit of my own personal nostalgia a little bit. This was a project on the funny vein also that was, we did for Nokia Lumia, which was a phone, camera phone put out by Nokia and Microsoft to compete with the iPhone. And it was supposed to be kind of awkward family memories or awkward family snapshots. And we shot these all with this Nokia camera iPhone or Nokia camera phone. And you know, let's see, when was this? It was probably like 2012. And that sounds like an awful long time ago. Whenever it was, I remember it was like an early time of shooting a commercial job with a phone. And I remember like we rented this big house and we had, you know, like these stylists on hand to kind of create these things. And the house had a certain character to it. It had this paneled room and this old phone and this red couch. And so it had these qualities to it. And we just kind of brought things in to augment it. But I remember like the shot list we came up with, it was like 25 shots a day. And I was like, well, how are we gonna do 25 shots a day? That's just too much. But, you know, shooting with this like phone, you just kind of went from thing to thing to thing. And things moved very, very quickly, you know. But again, I think I'm sharing this at a time when like, yeah, I was kind of marketing myself as like the funny guy, you know, the humorous photographer. And, you know, a lot of what I like to talk about in these projects are the idea that, or in these like lectures, is the idea that personal projects for me were the things that got attention. And again, like my actual commercial work was never great, really. It was just amusing, or it might have kind of been okay enough for something like that. But when it was a personal project I had done, it always seemed to be the thing that like got the attention. It wouldn't necessarily always get me a job, but it got me attention. And sometimes that would lead, you know, from one thing to another. And, you know, like I've done personal projects that have been totally ignored, you know, that, and ones I've done and shown to some people and then never showed them again, you know. And then I had various ones that had come out as books and different projects. And, you know, and what I wanted to look at today was, we were going to look at one project and really kind of talk about how it did end up steering my career. You know, we can kind of look at how that kind of morphed into different things. And so I want to get into some of these personal projects, but, you know, let me pause here and see, does anyone have any, because I do like when these things can be interactional rather than just me speaking. But so I want to present, you know, create these pauses. Is there anything we need to address?
Well, let's see. Thomas B, I think, wants to know if that dog is named Rhino. Is that Rhino in that image?
Yes, that is my friend Thomas Broning's dog, Rhino.
Mm-hmm.
And for this shoot, you know, we cast all these dogs and all these different things. And, you know, in advertising photography, there are many cooks in the kitchen. You can never get everybody on the same page. And Thomas had this dog, and I think I had a snapshot of it or something. And I was like, can we just use this dog? And everybody immediately agreed. And the dog got the contract. And
yeah.
I think that's Thomas holding the dog, and the shoot was over in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, get that dog an agent.
Yeah.
And Saul would like to hear more about group photos. You had that amazing one earlier with a bunch of folks in a room together.
Oh yeah.
You know, and we all know how challenging that can be. Yeah, that one there.
Yeah, you know, it was, I love this photo myself. And this was done for this company called, it wasn't done for them. It was done for one of these Day in the Life of America books. And it was a company called Code for America in San Francisco. And I think, you know, there's some technical stuff going on here that I could bore you with or try to explain very efficiently. But I got into shooting in this technique where I'm stitching together frames. Does anyone know what that is?
Yeah.
Yes. It is like a very common wedding photographer technique where you shoot a variety of frames and then in Photoshop you merge them. And what I really liked about it was it allowed me to not have to use a wide lens and push everybody far away. I could use like a portrait lens, like an 85 or a 50, and do a variety of frames and keep everyone right there, but still have an expansive amount of space in the photograph. And I mean, this photo we're seeing here, this is a good example. Like the woman in the middle, who was the main kind of point of the photograph, she's not lost in the mix of the 100 people who are in this. Like you can read her body language and you can make eye contact with her. And her body language is a little awkward and the way her hand is a little awkward, but those are real human qualities. And when I started to shoot in this way, it allowed me to like cram an awful lot of people in the picture, and somehow they all seem to have some substance, you know. And I don't know if it was because I wasn't using a wide angle lens or what it was, but it was something that once I figured out how to do it, I could do it in my sleep. Like someone would call and say like, you know, can you do one of those portraits for the Stanford physics department or something like that? And it was almost like a template. I had it down. I knew how to do it. And, you know, if I spelled it out, you'd see through it. But a lot of it has to do with like people ignoring the camera and then a couple key people looking at the camera and, you know, trying to play around with what's happening and getting people to be like talking to each other in the frame at times. And so I did a series of these, and this was something I was kind of like pushing and, you know, promoting on, you know, with my agent and on social media and these various things. And like many things, once you start promoting something, that's immediately when it gets ignored. You know, when you start to forget you did it, that's when maybe they call for it. But yeah, all attempts to promote this style were met with silence. But I still do it and like it, you know, and enjoy it when I can. Because
like you say, it gives a very different feel than a wide angle lens. So yeah, it's both gives the feeling of a group, but it's also much more intimate.
Yeah, you can be in with these people. And you know, the other thing that I did in working in this way is I would never light it, you know, because once you light it, it's over. It all looks fake or something like that. Like if I'm lighting it with a strobe or something, then there's a shadow falling on someone else and falling on someone else. So if you could do it with natural light, you solved like 80% of your problem there.
You don't even have any reflectors in here.
You know, that's a good question. I'm a big reflector guy myself. I think in other ones I've done, I have built a little wall of white, you know what I mean, to throw light back in. But in this one, it was just very good light there. It was a big wall of windows, you know. And then, of course, you have Lightroom to open these things up and push and pull things and stuff like that. But no, it was essentially simple. And, you know, I arranged all the people, and then the important person came in for a minute at the end and then left. You know what I mean? So you work with all the little people, and then you bring the big person in to just kind of jump in and then be gone. So, I mean, in commercial photography or editorial photography or whatever you want to call it, it's a practice. You learn how to solve problems, you know. And yeah, this was one, you know, a kind of like, I guess I'm trying to take the romance away from it because I really viewed it as like a problem solving type of thing. And once I kind of figured out how to do it, I could kind of do that.
And about how many images were stitched together for this one?
Oh, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's probably 4 or 5.
Okay.
You know, and for those who haven't done it, stitching together sounds like I'm sitting on my couch, you know, like with needle and thread, like lining things up and stuff like that. I'm pushing a button on Photoshop that does the stitching, you know. But so it's an automated thing, but yeah, you can learn how to do it fairly easily. Any other questions?
That's it for now.
Yeah. Where were we? I used to be the funny photographer. I think we were there. No one has questions about this photograph?
I totally know this reference, I think.
The interesting side to this is an actor that we hired for this photo, and his name was John Lennon. And I just thought that was the weirdest thing. It was like on set, they're like, you know, all right, the bedroom shot, John Lennon, you know, and I couldn't really get past that, you know. So, you know, this idea of personal projects that I keep kind of, you know, arcing back to, the power of a personal project really is that, like, if you're working commercially, you can have a client and they stop hiring you, you know, or there's a period where you're a very popular commercial photographer, and then there's a period when you're not. And when those things go, you know, I have seen it in my contemporaries be devastating, you know, and like business comes and goes, you know, business has its ups and downs. And there's periods where you have, like back in the magazine heyday, there would be periods where you were the magazine's favorite photographer. And those things change. A new photo editor comes in and that relationship is over. And you know, and that's happening now, even in, you know, like corporate jobs and things like that. And so to me, it was always important. I didn't want like the business to take away photography from me, you know, like, I think here I'm talking about myself as a commercial photographer, but I never really thought that was totally appropriate. Like that title, I kind of always felt I was someone who just had a relationship with photography. And for one period of time, I was being a newspaper photographer. And then now I'm like the commercial editorial photographer. And then now I'm teaching, and there's that. And so like these labels, I think, are fluid. And the one thing I always thought is if I had a personal project, well, that couldn't be taken away from me, you know, and that could be something that I'd always have in the ups and downs of business, really. And so, you know, my personal projects, they've, you know, it seems like, I mean, honestly, right now, I don't have one, you know, I don't have one I'm working on. The first big one that kind of, you know, was a 3-year investment and really was very exciting for me because it was the first thing that kind of got a lot of attention. And I felt like I did as much as I could with it, was this project I did called Sex Machines, Photographs and Interviews. And it was a series of portraits of people across America who were making these devices that people used for sexual purposes. They had sex with these machines. And to me, it was, the people were fascinating. And, you know, I could kind of meet them on the internet, and then I could go fly and meet them and get into their worlds for a couple days. And I was interviewing them. And in the final book that was published with this, it was interviews and photographs. And you know, it was something that I was very proud of. And the people who published the book, they worked with me on the interviews to really take away any kind of nasty, cynical tone that I might be putting in, and really let it be very accepting and loving. And I was really into that project. These are 2 portraits from that. This is a husband and wife who were outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. These are 2 pictures of just machines. The one on the left was in a pornography studio in San Francisco, made out of a mix master. Or what's that thing called? It's like some type of kitchen utensil. Extra credit if anyone can identify what that thing is.
That's a KitchenAid.
Oh, a KitchenAid mixer. Yeah, that. This image on the left was outside of New Orleans, and it was a sex machine made out of a leaf blower or something like that. And so these are real things people were making and using, and it was kind of this bubble in the culture at the time, you know. And to me, it was like that type of anthropological project where you're looking at a world that's different than yours. This one satisfied every kind of curiosity I had, you know, and I really loved these people. And I think it broke a stereotype for me. Like, my assumption was anyone making these things would be some socially disconnected person who couldn't relate to humanity. And the total opposite was true, you know, and these people were open to sharing their lives and their stories with me. It was a big kind of lesson, you know, for me. And then it had this subject matter that I just found crazy fascinating, you know. Now working on a project that has, you know, giant phalluses in it will not do wonders for your commercial career. And it, you know, it won't be ignored and it won't be hidden or forgotten. And so there definitely were some misunderstandings in presenting this work. Then to look at another project, and this is one I've been shooting over the, you know, just for 1 month over the past, ever since my kids were little. But I always wanted to paint a picture of the town that I live in, El Sobrante, California. And it's this kind of industrial town, or not industrial, I don't know what I would call it. It's a not very sexy Bay Area town. Like you wouldn't really go there to go out to dinner or anything like that, you know. Kind of working class town. And I always wanted to do photos of it, and I'm still kind of photographing the town every day in my own kind of way. But in October, the whole town is kind of transformed in this type of homemade dollar store, DIY type of theatricality. And, you know, shooting something like this is like a hunting story, you know, where you're not really talking to anybody, you're just running around trying to find things. And yeah, it occupied me probably for the past 6 years or so, you know. And this is another project that, you know, kind of personal project. This one didn't really relate to anything commercially either, you know, but definitely fascinated to photograph it. And whenever I was photographing it, it felt like, it felt like I was going on vacation, you know, or it felt like it was like a stress-free, commercial-free kind of just exercise, you know, and kind of like, you know, going fishing in a pond that's stocked with fish where you always know you're going to get something, you know what I mean? And that's what this kind of felt like. You know, it was always kind of just joyful for me. But again, this personal project has been like won, you know, major photo contests and been in Communication Arts Photo Annual and never opened any doors at all. You know, like it just didn't really have any way that like a commercial client or an editorial client could make that leap to. You know, and then we're going to look at echolalia. And so why don't we pause here? Is there any other things we need to address before we get into this?
Can I pipe in here? It's Jenny.
Yeah, hey Jenny.
Hi. That Halloween series, I just love it so much. Honestly, I don't know why it wouldn't be more appealing to like the advertise, like anything. Like I don't know, maybe it just completely aligns with my sense of humor. And I just made a little comment, like the funny photographer. They're so like, it's so human and funny and quirky and mundane and not mundane. Like I just love it so much. I don't know if I even have a question about it, but
I'll take that. No, I like that type of question. No, thank you for saying that. I think it looks like your sensibility, knowing your photographs too. You know what I mean?
maybe that's it.
No, I think there's a shared sensibility there, but no, I like this project a lot myself. And there is something that is like the town itself is good to photograph in, but it needs that extra little nudge of this kind of, let's just look at it during Halloween, you know, like in the same way with like Sex Machines, these people were fascinating and they had stories to tell, but it wouldn't be enough to just go visit them and make portraits of them. We needed this sensational subject matter kind of to get us in the door, you know. And I am a big believer in photography that like there's a sensational exterior, and then sometimes the photos are about something else. I mean, and I even feel that with Ansel Adams, like, yeah, a bunch of boring landscapes, you know what I mean? Like, who's going to want to look at these like dramatic landscapes? But when you see the stuff, it starts to seem like it's about something else, you know.
Can I chime in
Yeah,
for a minute?
sure.
Okay, so what I'm finding interesting is the way in which, in talking about these images, somehow what's being left out is yourself. And when I look at them, I see Tim. I see Tim's sensibility. I see Tim's signature or slash mark. I don't see them in any way as separate from you, but as very, very personal. So maybe you want to speak to that?
Oh, well, these are personal projects, so these definitely are, you know. But I think that the commercial work I do, it doesn't have that same sense of authorship. Like, there is a similarity where you could say like, oh, that's an Archibald portrait of all those people in a room.
Right.
But the content isn't really personal, if that makes sense.
Right. And yet, even in those images, I always, you know, what it's like a neon. It's Tim. I mean, I never, even in those, I never look at them without thinking about your identity or what, you know, what I know about your work at large. I understand that they're commissioned and it's commercial, but you actually, I think, have this talent to cross over.
Oh yeah, there's a little kind of going back and forth with this stuff, you know.
Well, I think you're too humble about that. But, you know, I'm always on Facebook. I'm always watching what you post. And I'm like, of course, that's Tim. So.
I appreciate that, Eva. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you. Please come to my class, show you.
Okay.
I'd like to say something.
Yeah.
You know, when you said that you're not sure that these personal photographs in this series, anyone looks at, or if it added to your commercial work, I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with and try to figure out. But I think that people who hire us, people who hire you, I think they see that work, and it adds to the totality of who you are. And even if they don't hire you to do that, it is part of you, and it is part of your personality and part of your makeup as a creative person, that you see the world in a humorous way, and that you love people like this. So I don't know if it didn't open any doors for you.
I would agree. The way Saul is looking at it there is like from the inside. And I do think that for all of us, like these personal projects that we do, they do appeal to people's intellect. And yeah, they might not hire you to take a picture like what we're looking at here, but there is something in that they might, you know, appeal to, or that it might appeal to them. And it is, no, of course, I always think that doing personal projects are the fuel where someone can really learn about you and what makes you tick. But then we're always juggling, all of us in this room, I think, juggling these lines of well, how come I don't have a Netflix special about my life? You know what I mean? Like, why don't I have, you know, like there's always someone doing something that's been blasted into the stratosphere bigger than whatever your thing may be, you know? And so, yeah, you know, there's always that kind of push and pull. But no, it is true. You do need to just do these things, and it does change the way you're perceived as an artist, you know? And I think none of us want to be perceived as simply the camera for hire guy, you know.
Right.
we want to be the camera for hire guy and something else or something like that. Or with some depth to them or something. So then there's this. And so echolalia. Echolalia is a word I made up. And there's a word like it in the world of autism, that's echolalia. And I didn't like that word because it sounded like diarrhea or something like that. It sounded too medical and gross. But this word I liked because it had echo in it. And then it had like lily in it. And it, my kid was little and I thought it was something that no one would know what it meant. And it had no baggage to it, but you could kind of get a feel for what it was bringing to mind, And so Eli, Archibald, he's 20 now, but it was before he was in kindergarten. Like as a baby, I guess he was fine. As he got older, he was a nightmare. He was very challenging. I was a very bad parent. And other parents were having a good time with their kids. And my wife and I, we weren't having a good time with Eli. And I remember I wanted to go to the pervert's garage and take a picture. I was into exploring the world with my camera and my world was getting very, very small, and every day it was like, what's wrong with Eli? Eli got thrown out of preschool. Eli punched a kid in the face. Eli was screaming for 20 minutes. Everything was Eli. And I remember feeling like I need some evidence here. I gotta figure out some evidence. And as a parent, first-time parent, you don't really know what's normal. You just know what you have and what you think others have. And I remember we were in the yard and he took a stick and he broke it into 3 places and it made a perfect square. And I remember thinking, what's that mean? That means something. I'm going to take a picture of that and show it to the doctor and the doctor's going to tell me what's wrong with Eli, And so, there was a sense of desperation, where as a parent, I couldn't really relate to my son and I couldn't really figure out even how to spend time with him. And he would have these tantrums that would brew like storms. And when they hit, there was no bringing back, there was no coming back from these things. And spending time with him was unusual. It was different. And his little brother was born and his little brother was like a big old jolly baby, and I think with his little brother in the house, suddenly I realized Eli was different. Spending time with Eli was unusual. It was not like spending time with a normal kid. And we started to make pictures together. And I think some of it was like, I wanted evidence. I thought if I could take a picture of him doing something unusual, again, I would show it to a doctor and the doctor would be like, oh yeah, that's this, And I think maybe it was some way of controlling him, like I wasn't the good parent. Like Eli, he didn't want to play with toys or anything. He just wanted to like look at doors opening and closing. And you couldn't like play Hot Wheels with him or anything, And it was very hard for me to figure out how to spend time with him. But we started taking pictures. And some of it was my plan. I would take all these pictures and show them to a doctor. And then, but immediately it became something that he wanted to do. And he wanted to see the photos, like an early digital camera. You could set up a picture and take a photo and he could run around and see it immediately, And then at the time, I was definitely into my fact finding or my collecting of the evidence, and I remember we took him to a doctor and here it says 7/10/2007. We took him to a doctor and the doctor was kind of throwing all these ideas out. And this was my wife taking notes. And I remember I took the notebook and I made a scan of it. And then the same day he stubbed his knee and it got all bloody and there was a Band-Aid, SpongeBob Band-Aid. And I was like, oh, here, let's scan this too, you know? And then later I would kind of put these things together and look for relationships and look for equivalents, you know? And there was something about, like, these pictures were made on a scanner, not with a camera. And there was this unemotional quality that the scanner would bring to things, where it wasn't like a camera making a decision or deciding what would be sharp or what wouldn't be sharp. Everything was scanned under the same light and the same quality. And it had the same unemotional look. And it started to make me feel like, well, this is kind of what it's like to spend time with him. There's this like emotional flat level there. This might be good, you know, for this. And so, you know, we're making pictures to try to do something. And then I'm kind of collecting them and putting them together. And, you know, at this stage, there was always this feeling like anything could happen, you know, like he could do something that would like hurt him or hurt one of us or something. Like there was really this feeling like, yeah, anything could happen. And I do remember around this time, there was a school shooting, one of these famous school shootings, and the kid was autistic. And everybody in the autism community was like, I don't believe you're blaming this autistic kid for being autism for doing the shooting. And myself, I remember thinking, who knows what these kids will do, you know what I mean? Or at least my kid, like I couldn't read it, you know? And so with Eli, there was this sense of danger at times, spending time with him. And so we would make these photos. And a lot of the things that would drive them would be his obsessions. Like he was obsessed with these pliers for like a week and would have them in his hands all the time and be swapping them back and forth all the time and put them in his mouth and using them as like laser beams or like trackers to carry him through the house. And then he would kind of let it go. And so during these periods, that's when we would make these photographs, you know, of the thing that was the obsession at the time. And in the beginning, there was fuel to it, you know, like it definitely felt like, it really felt like we were trying to figure something out. And it was a pursuit and it was satisfying. And it was almost like, I mean, if I was a baseball player and we were playing pitch and catch, it would be the same thing. But I was a photographer, we would make pictures together. He'd get to see the pictures because it was a digital. There were times that I took out the Hasselblad film camera. And for him, that was like a pure fantasy because it had a ritual series of mechanical movements that you had to take out the dark slide and cock the shutter and advance the film and pop up the thing to look through the viewfinder. And he had all those rituals nailed down immediately. And he would take a picture of me, I would take a picture of him. So it was the process, you know. And again, I'm sticking my hand into the river of stuff that's constantly coming out when you have a house, you know, house of kids, you know, like, you know, okay, a tooth came out and he, I guess, got on a typewriter or some type of word processor and wrote this note. Dear Tooth Fairy, from now on, you may take my teeth. Love, Eli. Giving permission to the Tooth Fairy. And then on the image on the left, I remember he was into the Tooth Fairy and he had cut this thing out at school that was like a big snowflake or something. And he put it over his face and was like, look, I'm the Tooth Fairy, you know. And I liked these pictures, well, one, because we were doing something and we were learning about each other, but also a lot of these things reminded me of my own childhood and that kind of sense of imagination, you know, that you'd have. And in retrospect, I think a lot of the things he was doing were probably calming due to autism, you know, or like sensory would kind of shut out the static. But then a lot of these things, I think maybe all of us could relate to. It kind of felt like childhood. You know, I think I called this picture at the time the listening device because it almost looked like he's some creature who doesn't have an arm, but he's got a robotic arm and he's listening to the ground and picking up on something. And I mean, when we talk about like, there's no bad picture, or yeah, there's no bad pictures anymore. What I think worked for this project, and it wasn't a plan. I was just shooting. I wasn't even thinking anybody would ever see these photos, but they almost look like photo one photos, like photos you take in your very first photography class, where you kind of put the person by the window and take their picture, you know, or they feel like where you photograph your shadow on the ground, that little sense of discovery with something so simple, you know. And yeah, I think that, like, I don't really take credit for these pictures. Those commercial things, the big group pictures, I learned how to do those and I executed those. Like, but these, it was just more of a feral experience of a father and son taking pictures, and I don't really take credit for them. It was more of a collaboration. And then, you know, they definitely seemed to speak to people when this came out, you know. This is called A Note to Me, A Note to Me, A Note to His Brother. It was like when the kids discovered the power of words, you know, being able to write and having it affect someone. These are on a scanner again. You know, I remember we found a nest in the backyard, and you know, with your kid, I mean, I'm so far away from it now. My kids are older and I don't obsess on them like I did when Eli was young and I was trying to figure out what the deal was. But I remember looking at the nest and being like, maybe that's like his brain. Maybe that's where his brain is, where all the wires are connecting, but some aren't really connecting correctly. And that's nature. And then he's nature too. And neither of these is perfect. Oh, nature's not perfect. Oh, here, let's try to make these two things equivalents, you know. And then also with this project, I would try to give him a voice, you know, things he found or things he was doing. And he had a pair of scissors he was cutting things out with, and we used that to cut this picture. And so I wanted it to kind of be a little bit of a dialogue, you know. You know, and then as a commercial photographer, you know, I was used to controlling things, you know, or coming into some magazine photography assignment and being able to like set up the light and control it exactly and figure out where everything was going to be and have someone do what I told them to do at that time. And photographing Eli, like he's running around with the house with the hose, you know, and then I'm like, well, all right, let's make a picture with this. What should we do? And he's like, well, let's go in the backyard. So then we go in the backyard, and I think I was like, well, can you lay down there? And he's like, well, no, it's going to hurt. He's like, well, okay, I'll just do it for a minute. And it wasn't even a minute. He did it for like a second. And I think I was just able to like squeeze 2 exposures out, both of which were badly underexposed, you know what I mean? And then there's no like, hey, you got to do it again. You know, like here's an autistic 5-year-old who's with ADHD. Like he's not going to like do what you tell him to do. And there was a sense of like urgency, you know, to the picture making. Although when I look at them now, they look very peaceful and they look very like kind of like done with control and contentment, you know. So for whatever reason, that feeling kind of surfaced, you know. You know, and this is like, you know, back to the collaborative nature of these things. This picture, Eli and his brother were playing around the house at night, and they realized they could put their body into, their bodies would fit perfectly into these plastic toy containers that we had. And so, you know, Eli's like, take a picture of me in here. This will be something we'll do. Because it did fit in with like the types of like, we'd find something and then make a photo. And I was like, let's do it then tomorrow when the light's nice, you know? And so, I mean, he had focus when there was something he wanted to do. And I remember I was kind of set up for him to come home from school. I knew the light would be nice. We had agreed that, you know, the bucket was going to be there and we would do the photo. And he comes home from school and he sees the bucket and he realizes this is what we're going to do. And he takes off his clothes and he gets into the bucket. And you know, I'm pushing the button fervently and I'm like, turn your nose down, you know, put your head down a little bit. And he's like, I think that's it. That's all I can do. And then he comes out and he looks at the back of the camera. He's like, we got it. And the idea that like, he's telling me we got it. You know what I mean? Like the idea that he, for a minute there, I'm not his dad telling him to, you know, stop throwing food at his brother, and I'm not trying to correct him, and I'm not trying to talk to a doctor about him. We're truly collaborating right there as equals. And we're both excited with this kind of moment of creating this thing that we got. And there was something magical about that moment, you know, and by moment, I truly mean moment, where within minutes, I'm like, you know, don't grab those from your brother, and you better get, you know, you better sit down and start paying attention, you know. And so like immediately I, you know, would revert to being a parent again too, you know. And so there always was that push and pull. But when we could suddenly be equals and collaborators, you know, I think at that point, suddenly we realized we didn't need to make these photos anymore. We didn't need to like have to understand each other. We kind of had done that already. And now we were just like kind of having a good time together. I mean, and if anything, like, I don't know how to cure autism, and I don't know how to do any of these things. And honestly, I don't even like care about autism. Like, I'm not on any autism boards or anything like that. But these photos have come to define, at least for a period, autism, you know, to the world. To me, it was really about the relationship. I think like any relationship with your wife or with your friends or with your kid, what you put into it is what you get out of it, you know. And when you really invest in it and you really kind of put the energy in, you get something. And I think that's what we're seeing here. You know, I don't think it had anything to do with photography or autism, or I think it was, he learned about me, I learned about him. We put time in together, and I think it kind of allowed us to kind of meet in the middle of a bridge a little bit. I think that's the last picture on echolalia. So why don't we pause here? And does anybody have any questions on that project? And believe me, we have handled every question on that. Like, there was a period where Eli and I were brought to Emory University in Atlanta to talk to the medical school and have an exhibition of echolalia. And then there was a meeting with the ethics department. And I definitely wasn't looking forward to this meeting with the ethics department, thinking that it would just be this, you know, like, you are exploiting your kid, which, you know, these accusations are definitely there for sure, you know, and I can't really argue with them either. But, you know, the thing actually was, you know, it was eye-opening for everyone, really. But, you know, whenever you're photographing a kid and there is something like this, and there is, you know, I don't think it's the nudity that is the thing as much as just the unusualness of these situations and the connection. So it definitely has been analyzed, like, you know, really from every angle. And I don't deny anyone their opinion on these things, you know. But let's hear from you. Does anyone have any questions?
There's been a fair number of questions just about how the two of you worked together.
Yeah.
And how much, you know, how much you were influenced, how much he was influenced. And you've discussed that a little bit, but maybe we could go back over, you talked about some specific sessions, but yeah, we're all curious about, how each of these came to pass.
Yeah, you know, the good stuff always was something where he would have a thing that he would either be doing, and then later he would identify as like, oh, let's do a picture of this. Those were always the good photos. Whenever I got greedy and decided, oh, here, let's do my idea, it always looked self-conscious, obvious, and it didn't have that sense of magic that these other things did. Like, say, this one here, we had gone to a dollar store, you know, as some kind of situation reward to the kids for doing something, and they could buy something at the dollar store. And he bought this statue of this German Shepherd. And we didn't have a German Shepherd. We didn't have a dog at the time, like none of these things. He just simply liked this thing. And he brought it home, and it was like with him constantly. And it was, you know, it would almost be like his obsessions would last like a week and a half to 2 weeks. And when we followed those, and those became the thing to make the photograph, that's usually where the good things came from. This picture I like, and this was, you know, from that kind of following that pattern. There's another one with a log.
How did he interact with the images once you've taken them? You mentioned that you show him the back of the camera, but did he also have other ways that he would see the images and react to them?
Well, I mean, what we put this out as a self-published book. And then because I was a magazine photographer, I was in the position to get it into the hands of photo editors and stuff. And it actually was like in every major magazine, and then we would give talks about it. And at the time, I wanted him to come on these talks because obviously there's an accusation of like, yeah, you're exploiting your kid, or I wanted the audience to meet the kid and to like hear from him and ask him questions, you know, and, you know, like only he could do, you know, utterly fearless in front of an audience who's saying like, what's it feel like to be autistic? And he would answer that, you know, and, you know, as me as a parent, I'm cringing and thinking like, what have I gotten him into? I don't know if this is a good idea at all. But he didn't care to look at the photographs. But when the book, you know, when we did the book, and then I was like, hey, do you want to see it? You know, and he's not like us where he wants to see a photo book, you know, he's looking at it in the same way I would look at snapshots from my youth that my mom would give me. You know, he would be like, oh, that's right, that's the day we had that funnel. Oh yeah, no, I remember that. Like, and for him, you know, this was between the ages of 5 and 8. And so, you know, if he's 10 years old and he's looking at a picture of him when he's 5, well, that's very nostalgic for him. You know what I mean? Like that's half his life. So he didn't look at it as art or anything like that. You know, he definitely looked at it as the way I would look at a picture of myself, like when I was in Little League or something, you know, like with the log here, I think we had firewood or bought firewood or something. And there was a log that he liked the shape of, and it was kind of shaped like a gun. So he carried around like a gun, but then it was also shaped in this way that he could kind of lean against it and kind of touch it. And he, you know, he had it all the time. And so I was like, oh, well, hey, you know, let's make a picture of you with the log. And I assumed we'd be in the backyard or something like that. And he was like, oh, okay, here, no, let's come back to the room and do it. And then he just kind of did this as I'm like set up with the camera on the tripod. And, you know, it's dim, it's a early digital, it's at a very high ASA. And it almost seems like, I think he was like balancing his head against it, but it feels like he's like reading Braille or something like that, or he's listening to it. Or there was something in the pictures where it always seemed like he was tapping into his senses or something like that.
Has Eli's reaction changed over time as he's grown older? Does he react to the images differently than he did when he was younger?
He doesn't care. Kids don't care what their parents do. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like, yeah, like if we had, like there's been many exhibitions and many speaking engagements of which he would come to. And then it got to be a point where he would say, I'll do the speaking engagement if it's not in town. You know, if it's in San Francisco at some art thing, I'll do it. But if it's like in El Sobrante at the public library, I'm not going to do it because I might meet a kid that I know or something. And he was on CNN talking about this project, and kids, and it was on in the summertime. And I think I was with them going back to school, and kids were like, Eli, we saw you on TV. And I think it ended there. You know what I mean? Like I don't think he explained what it was or anything. And he's like, something my dad did, you know. So no, not, I mean, he's 20 now and obviously can reflect on things. And, you know, we self-published this book. He still makes money off of the book, you know, so he's aware of it in that sense. No, I think there was a point where the two boys of mine told me not to photograph them anymore, you know, like when they were older, like for Instagram and stuff. They're like, look, we don't want to pose. We have our own social medias. We don't want to be on your social media. And, you know, obviously I respected that, but Eli didn't care about this thing. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't trying to shut this thing down. He viewed this as some other thing that happened when he was little, and, you know,
right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we kind of covered everything. in the
I have
chapter.
a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. Okay, so when you take a photograph, there is always the skill that you bring to it and what you are very conscious of and the role of intentionality. I'm wondering what role you attribute to the unconscious in these photos with Eli, if any.
Oh, like my unconscious or my subconscious or something like that. Well, they definitely were. It was the first time that I really relinquished control, you know, like I was the guy who had to tell everybody what to do and put the light right in that spot and control everything. And even like Sex Machine, say that was a previous personal project. Those were, it was all like, I'm telling the people everything to do, you know, controlling what's going where, and then the lighting has to be just right. And I would bring all these lights to the thing. And the shoots would take a long time, be like, you go to Olive Garden with the people the night before, and then you have the entire day the next day to like hear their story and make their photos. Where with Eli, the pictures were just more feral. They were like two exposures taken in a dark room, and then you hope you got something, and there's no going back, you know? And so that instinctual type of picture making, I think, makes them look different. And they don't seem as like self-conscious probably as my other photos. They don't seem like they were made really. They seem like they just were, kind of, you know. And so, yeah, I think that because they had to be done so immediately, it kept me from ruining them, if you know what I mean. Like from getting in my own way of being like, well, let's have something better in the background or something like that, where you just had to like do it and then, oh, okay, it's done. Maybe we got something. So that's probably, does that answer your question? Like, I think they were done.
So. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something very spontaneous, intuitive. I mean, I don't look at them and, you know, I mean, myself and Ken, we would go to events and we would let go. And, you know, we didn't always know what we got. But after we looked at what we got, there was a recognition of what we got.
Right.
You know what I mean? There was this, the photograph spoke back. It became a mirror for something within ourselves that emerged, that not even, I don't want to use emerged, that erupted, which made them magical. And you do talk about these images as magical. And I think they are. And what's so amazing about them is, you know, when you're dealing with, say, a disability or a category, you know, something in that way, you know, the potential is that it's reductive. But what's amazing about these is that they're not reductive. They open something up.
Oh, it became greater.
To everyone, you know, whether you have a child with, you know, an issue, a problem, or whatever. I don't want to call it a problem because you don't deal with it as a problem, but it opens it up in a way that, you know, that everyone can relate to and see something of themselves and their own experience in.
Yeah, like that happened. I would agree. And it wasn't calculated on my part.
No, of
And I
course
think
not.
it's very hard to do it again too. But
Ah,
you know, but I think it is, I do think photographers, if you've been doing it a long time, you get in your own way. You know what I mean? Like you try to make a good photo, you know, and that could ruin things. And sometimes when you're given a lot of limitations, I think is maybe your best work can kind of come out, you know. No, it was a good observation there.
Timothy, I'd like to add something to what
Yeah.
Eva was saying.
Yeah.
Because it got me to thinking when she was talking about the subconscious. I honestly don't really know what that's all about, the subconscious. When I see these pictures and how you explained that it was a collaborative with Eli, and what I see is that you recognized there was a recognition
mhm.
and a aha moment or moments when you said, damn, he's not going to let me screw this up. Let's leave things be, let's leave things as they are. He's not going to let me make it into a quote unquote photograph in a more commercial or editorial sense, but it is what it is. It's magical as it is.
Mhm.
Leave it alone. It's great as it is. And I think if we're going to go into, because I see these as spiritual scenes, godlike scenes, scenes from heaven. And I think that he opened a door for you of creativity that might not have happened if you had not done this project.
Oh, without question. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's the thing. I thank you for that observation, Saul. That was
Tim, I also have something to add to that.
Hey, Angie.
Hi. I've worked with autistic kids for like almost 20 years.
Mhm.
And to me, it seems like it was a sensory thing for him. And once that sensory was satisfied, he was done.
Mm.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I would agree with that. There is a lot of like feeling the grass on your back and feeling the balloon on your face and touching.
Or just being scrunched in the container.
Yeah.
You know, that to me, that's what it looks like to me with just dealing with kids with autism. It was like a sensory thing for him. And it's like he's trying to explain to you in his own way that this is what it is. And when I'm done, I'm done.
That's a very good observation. Good dots to connect there. Yeah, that makes sense. It does make sense. Thanks for that, Angie.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I wonder in the pictures where you, one side is Eli with a log, and the other side is piece of bread. So
yeah.
what you're feeling, is it that piece of bread represent his or your feelings?
You know, it's interesting. So he, you know, ripped this hole into this piece of bread. And yeah, I guess to me, it was like, is it a metaphor for something? Is it a metaphor for, you know, some absence that I have or that he has? Or is it as simple as it looks kind of like the shape of the log a little bit, like if it was put through there. And so there's a lot of different things, you know, I think that was going through my brain at the time. But yeah, there was a little bit of like, oh, is this the emotional hole that, you know, is not present or something like that? So yeah, like a subtle metaphor that maybe could go in a variety of directions, but in something as basic as a piece of bread, you know. Does that answer your question? Should we move on? I see that it is, it's 8:28. How are we doing for time, Vince?
Yeah, we still got the room, so we're not gonna get kicked out yet. If and done a nice job of covering some of the questions. If you've got some more images you'd like to show, I'm sure we'd like
Yeah.
to see them.
Okay, yeah, and I want to, I mean, I can't explain really how much that project ended up changing my career. Where I remember there was a point where an art director called me and asked me to do a project. And I think I said, well, you want like the funny photos or something like that? And she was like, she's like, look, I don't like that commercial work you do. I don't like it. It's too self-conscious and it's too self-aware. I want you to approach this the way you approach that project on your son. And at the time I was like, well, I can't do that on demand, you know, like that was like a once in a lifetime thing. Like I can't manufacture that. And then it became clear that like you couldn't do a Google search on my name without all those pictures from Ecolilia coming up. Like it erased everything kind of, you know, to the casual observer. And I truly had to learn how to make pictures that felt like those pictures. If I wanted to continue this like kind of commercial career, everybody, they wanted things to feel like that. And I didn't really know how to do it, but then I did have this early assignment that was about boys' relationships to Matchbox cars. And I used as a model my youngest son and his friend. And we made photographs in the house. And these were the first ones that felt like a commercialized version of Ecolilia, you know, like there was a kind of primitiveness and sense of maybe simple discovery and unpolishedness, you know, that seemed to feel like those. And so I just collected some projects here that kind of, you know, came from that kind of shift where suddenly everything had to relate to Ecolilia. This was a book we got commissioned to create that was about autism that was published in another country. And they wanted to use Eli as a model, have me do the photos. And then, but by that time, Eli was too big and it didn't fit. So we used his little brother, Wilson. We shot these all in my bedroom in my El Sobrante house with an illustrator who drew things on the wall.
Wow.
Drew things on paper that we laid down on paper and then, you know, photographed on that. Shot that in the backyard, standing on a ladder. And so it was almost like the kind of shadow of Ecolilia started to kind of cover everything. And people wanted that, but also I found it came easier to me. And the idea of a funny, polished photograph was, I didn't really know how to do those things anymore, but these other things, suddenly I could make these photos, you know. And then it kind of was, people would come to me for projects that were about the messiness of childhood, or kids with eating disorders, or kids who were cutting themselves. Or this was a project on homeschooling, but they definitely liked the messiness of the Ecolilia kind of scenes, and they wanted that for this project. This was another project shot. We used my friend Thomas Browning's house, and we cast a model, and this was for teens who have eating disorders. This is for kids who are addicted to texting their friends, not talking to their parents. And suddenly this kind of parenting, you know, understanding the kids, be it in a commercialized way or in a more raw way, was the thing that, you know, kind of trickled down from Ecolilia into the commercial arena. This is the picture of a mother and a son shot for Stanford Medicine School. This is another project done for Stanford on kids who had undiagnosable diseases. And, you know, myself, any shoot I get nervous to do. And the bigger the ad campaign, the more anxiety I have. But as I began doing these things where it was like brain damaged adults, people who have seizures, kids who have, you know, some undiagnosed thing, I really went into these shoots with a sense of serenity and confidence that I never had before. I knew I could connect with those kids. And I remember before the pandemic hit, we had a job in 2020 that was at a living facility for adults with learning disabilities and brain damage that was in Sarasota, Florida. And I remember we sent a location scout out to shoot the place so we could figure out how we're gonna take pictures in there. And it was like a filthy rec room with junk all over the place and board games and basketball courts and piles of papers. And it was the worst location any photographer would want. And I remember looking at it and panicking for 2 seconds and then being like, I'm sure the guy will be fascinating to photograph. I'll just photograph the guy, it'll be fine. And that type of confidence I never had before, you know. These are two kids that were brothers who did not talk. We set this up in their kitchen. And I just felt like I could connect with these people. And no matter how hard it seemed like it was, I felt like I could understand them.
See what games are taped?
Yeah.
Say that again?
Good. Oh, Everton.
Newcastle.
I think Thomas B needs to mute.
Oh, shit. Shoot.
This is a story that was done for People magazine about a kid who was shot in the head by his mom and suffered brain damage in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And definitely hard, but you know, hard to fit in with the family and hard to be the journalist flying in and trying to connect with everybody. But I absolutely love this photograph. I love his hand. I love all their hands. I like this little backyard space, you know, all of that. This is other pictures from the project on that boy. This is the thing we just shot a couple weeks ago for Scientific American on a girl who had gene replacement therapy. And she lived in the foggy avenues, so we timed it when the fog would fill the streets. And that's her and her mom. This is another picture done for Stanford Medicine. And yeah, and I never saw a picture of a kid that, or I never saw a baby that seemed to like connect in that way, you know. This is a more commercial job that we did for Botox Therapeutics. And this is more polished and it's more commercial, you know, but still we needed to bring humanity to this. And there was something that seems, you know, like we had a makeup artist, we rented an entire house, we had tons of lights outside to make it look like a light-filled thing. And so it's going to have this commercial polish, you know, and the wardrobe is all selected. It's not going to seem as raw, but I think within all that commercial packaging, there's something real there. Then we'll just kind of wrap this up quickly. This is a project that kind of also was an offshoot of Ecolilia, which was about transgender teenagers in small towns around America. And so they wanted to focus on these kids that weren't in like LA or New York or San Francisco, but were in these small towns. And this was another one that, you know, I knew I could relate to these kids and I knew I could connect with their parents. And I'm not bragging, I'm more talking about it as in, I was surprised that I could, because with a lot of these shoots, with the people you have to meet and the art director teams you have to work with, I'm usually intimidated. I'm usually defensive and it triggers my insecurities. But, you know, with this demographic, I don't have the same problem. And then the last thing is this was also kind of related to the Ecolilia project, is there was a TV show about teen suicide called 13 Reasons Why. And they had reached out to me knowing the work, and they had a character in the TV show who was a high school yearbook photographer who was stalking the main character, hiding around, snapping photos of her. He had an extreme crush on her. He was stalking her, and they wanted me to make the photos that his character would make. And to me, it was a great project because it was kind of like you could get into the character and be the photographer that character, you know, make the photos that character would make. And so I'd come to the set and then connect with the star, who is this actress right here. And we'd have like 20 minutes where we'd run around and make these stalking photographs. And then she'd go back to work. And it had to feel like, you know, this kind of high school yearbook photographer aesthetic. And, you know, I just like to end with these because they're different and they're unusual. They're not my typical thing, but I think it's an interesting trickle down from that echolalia. And there was something with these, there was a guy who was the director, cinematographer on the project who was older and he was very renowned, and I forget his name right now, but I remember him, he was constantly telling me, look, you got to make them more out of focus. You got to make them more out of focus and more shaky and more like a high school kid would make these photographs, you know? And so there was a lot of kind of, you know, freedom, you know, in that. But they still had to feel like he's like surreptitiously, you know, like watching her. Letting things go out of focus in this big blur. And I think, like, say this final image, this is like what they liked the best, you know, and there was something that was exciting about just letting things kind of be like that. And that's it. That is the show. I thank you all for coming.
Awesome. Tim, thank you so much for the presentation.
You are welcome.
And give you a second to catch your breath. We talked earlier about how demanding these Zoom presentations are because you're just not getting the energy back that you're used to in a live presentation. But I would like to bring Saul into the conversation. He had a few, hopefully softball questions he wanted to throw at you. But we'll see. We'll see what Saul has to say.
This is more of a question for other photographers, which most of us are here, and creatives, but in visiting your website, Timothy, and it's not a criticism, please, it's not, because I do the same thing. You have a lot of work on it.
Oh yeah.
You have a lot of work on it. And how do you respond to people who say, edit tight? And I know when that comment is directed towards Sandy and I say, well, I want our website to reflect our work, our life's work, and also that it reflect the type of work we want to get. It has to play all these different fields. How do you respond to people who say that they think you have too much work and maybe you need to edit tighter? What's your response to that?
Oh, I think that's valid, you know, and here I feel like as I'm working with students, I'm always encouraged, like the students' error is always to like include everything, you know, and I would agree, I have a ton of stuff on there. To me, and then even with my rep, they want us to have things in like the same picture in multiple galleries, you know, like, so that if you're searching under like corporate lifestyle, you'll see the images, but if you're searching under portrait, you'll see the same things and stuff like that. So some of the things follow that. I think my thing could be a lot tighter, absolutely. And then I'm always torn between, well, can people find the personal projects or can they find the, you know, can they find what I want to steer them to, you know? And, you know, I don't know what the answer is. The one thing with me is like, I have gone through periods, like I'm not the funny photographer anymore. And so I am like the physical book that we just produced for Tide Pool, it doesn't have any of like the funny stuff in it. It all has the kind of post-echolalia stuff in it. And so for myself, I like to keep it contemporary to what my stuff looks like now, you know, and try to weed out phases that I've kind of left behind, you know. I don't know if that makes any sense. I mean, as a photographer though, I would say, and especially like teaching, criticism and people's input to your work is invaluable. You know what I mean? Like I view all these things as something you take in and you just absorb and then, you know, thankful for the action. I don't really see it as, I don't really see those things as negative as much as constructive. You know?
Yeah, I agree.
I had a question. How do you think about the changes to your relationship to Eli based on what he's kind of given you through this work?
Could you rephrase it a little bit?
Yeah, I didn't say it really clearly. So, I mean, you know, I'm sure, okay, so I guess the background is I lost my daughter 7 years ago.
Ooh.
And decided to become a photographer to kind of honor who she was. She was creative, so I became a photographer. So all my photography stems out of that. So I'm looking, you know, I was talking to my grief counselor today about that, and I'm looking at your work and I'm saying, you know, and so other than let me finish what I first said, other than the fact that my daughter died and, you know, I'm grieving every day, she's given me the best life I could have possibly had. So I'm looking at your work and I'm thinking, God, you know, your son Eli has given you the gift of becoming the photographer I think you probably always wanted to be.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, reflect on that.
Yeah.
Firstly, very sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Your observation is on target. It affected me more when he was young, you know, like right after that, like there was a point where Time magazine called us, back when people cared about magazines, for Eli and I to create a series of photos that looked just like Echolalia for an issue they did about mental health in kids. You know what I mean? And the idea that even happened, you know what I mean? Like, I remember thinking at the time, like, dear Lord, what, you know, like, I can't believe this is even happening. And yeah, like here we're able to do these father-son things that I couldn't have really imagined, where we're going to like give a talk and he's answering questions to the audience. And as a parent, you're simultaneously proud and then questioning every move you've made, you know, like the push and pull of all those things. And so, no, my involvement with him definitely pushed me into the deep waters in my own photography and in my parenting. And, you know, and there was a lot of, in doing that project, there was a lot of, and then talking about it, there was a lot of admitting of the darker sides of my own personality, like the shame I felt of having this autistic kid, and, you know, embarrassment of, you know, why is he not like everyone else? And then the bitterness of like, why is parenting harder for me? Like these ugly emotions that you don't ever want to talk about. I talk about them now because it's in the past, and I don't, you know, I don't think like that anymore. But no, it definitely was something. There was a period though where I really wanted, like I'm a divorced single dad raising those two kids during the aftermath of Echolalia. Divorced dad, not totally single dad, like their mom was around, but the kids lived with me. And there was a period where I did wonder if Eli and I were too connected. You know what I mean? Like he's 16 years old and he's going to get the groceries and then he's planning family vacations. And then I'm selling his book out of the garage and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And so honestly, in the trajectory of as your kids are growing, when he went away to school, I was very happy that which is what he's doing now, that he kind of found his new life that was out of the home and away from me and totally in his own territory. And so that kind of leaving the nest thing has been important for both of us, you know.
Thank you so much for sharing this whole presentation. It was really amazing, very moving and very deep and very personal. So,
oh, good. No, I'm glad you could get something from it.
Yeah, it's a real gift you've given us. Thank you.
Appreciate it. No, I appreciate your sharing as well, Richard. Thank you.
So I have another question.
Yes.
To be obnoxious. First of all, let me tell everybody that you were a student of my partner, Ken Greggs.
That is true.
And you were, from the time I remember, you were his rock star. So that preceded anything that you've shown us. He always saw this incredible talent in you. So I just want to get that out there.
Appreciate that.
The other thing is, so here you are moving from the series with your son, and you know, commercially now you're moving into these other areas where, you know, you're dealing with other people whose children have some just, you know, problems or disabilities or whatever. You know, there are a lot of photographers who they take a commercial project. I remember Mary Ann Mark. We would run into her when we were photographing wrestlers.
Oh,
and
wow.
She was doing a commercial project, you know, a commercially hired to photograph these wrestlers. And then when she was done, she would put that work aside. She would take out her black and white film and she would photograph the wrestlers in her own style and from her own, you know, from her own vision. And did that impulse at all come to you in this work with all these other children? And do you ever, I mean, I know you do black and white, you know, with Halloween and some, you know, some of these other projects, but do you ever think about wanting to do black and white film once you put away the commercial, you know, project, and then take it to the same subjects and work with black and white?
You know, it's interesting. Well, with like people who are challenged or, you know, handicapped or whatever terminology you want to use, I think there's that idea of like, oh, the serious, sensitive photojournalist or something like that. Like, I don't want that. I want it to be funky and cool, and like those two kids in the wheelchair, you know what I mean? Those two kids, the brothers who were in the wheelchair, and one of them's working on an iPad. I guess I kind of feel like I wanted that to look kind of hip and cool a little bit, you know what I mean? You know, with color or something. But your question of like making a picture for myself, it's very hard for me, like on these commercial things, be it editorial, commercial, I feel the stress to make sure I'm doing a good job for what needs to be done, that I very rarely say, okay, I'm done. Now it's time for me to do my own thing. You know, there was one picture in the slideshow today of a kid sitting on the ground, and there was like a big kind of costume next to him that was like a big rabbit or something like that. And that picture was, I was there for something else where we did a commercialized photo, and then the kid was there because it was like take your kid to work day, and I was like, oh, can I make a picture of him there? And there I did, because I'm interested in kids and their imagination and those, and I thought all the pieces were there. But it's very rare that I do that. I'm not confident enough, you know, because I have heard about Mary Ellen Mark as well, doing things like that. Like, okay, shoot's wrapped, now it's my time. You know what I mean? And I've never had that like confidence, you know, like to know I had it and now I can just like do whatever it is I want.
What a shame, Tim, because you definitely have it.
Yeah, we got it, all right.
Timothy?
Yeah.
I got a question.
Yeah.
You have a distinctive style for me that I hope other people see too, where a lot of your photos look like they're done in natural light.
Oh yeah.
And many of them were done in natural light.
Yeah.
But some of them must have been lit, right?
You know, I am.
And to finish that off, and oftentimes you have this tone, this warm tone, but it's not a warm tone, it's another color. That is your signature. I see it as your signature. When I see one of your photos on Instagram or on Facebook or wherever, I can identify it. It's you. And when you said earlier in the presentation that everyone takes good photos now, I think the answer is to have a distinctive, unique style like you do. And that's and like some of us here who have unique styles. What do you think?
Oh, no, I think style is important now, but it always has been. but I think it's the intangibles that are the thing. Like, I think it is like the emotional connection, or it's having a powerful idea, or if it's like the things that are important now, like now that craft is gone because the craft is too easy now, you know, that now it's the kind of soft skills that are important, or your ability to kind of talk your way into a situation, or, you know, these are the things. But to get back to natural light, I am the biggest natural light photographer there is these days. And the secret to it is scouting. Like every shoot is scouted so I can know exactly what the light's going to be on the day I shoot. So, you know, we did a shoot of the scientist on Friday, but I was able to scout the location, which was like a classroom in Berkeley that had a big blackboard in it. I was able to scout it like 5 days before and figure out exactly where the light was going to be good, so that on the day of, we could have light pouring in the window and I could bounce it with reflectors. And so, you know, to me, the big thing is it's harder to figure out where the light's going to be good and then convince the client or the subject to do it at that time. It's harder to do that than it is to like set up all the lights and stuff like that. But it is, I like it better. And I think you go through phases, you know what I mean? Like I went through a phase where I used a ring light for all these things. And so you go through different phases, and now the phase I'm in is trying to figure out where the good natural light is, and then convincing everybody that it has to be done at that time, you know? So natural light and reflectors, you know, if I have to, there was a guy who was a guest artist at the school here from India, Tarun Kawal. And he had this philosophy where he said, I'll never light, if it's outside, I'll never light it. There's sun, I'll never light it if it's outside. It's gonna look too fake. No matter what, it's gonna look fake. And I thought that was an interesting philosophy. And then he also was a big proponent of, he was like, no, reflectors are great, but everybody's walking around with a white reflector. He's like, never in the world is there a bright white wall that's like out there reflecting things. So he would use things like tree bark to reflect, and he would use things like fabric to reflect, with the idea of that's what we see in nature, or that's what we see in our life, is other things reflecting, never a purely white thing. And so, I mean, lighting is infinite. And so, and everyone's got their own little way, like people have ways to play guitars and stuff like that, you know? And so, yeah, right now, I would say probably every picture on my site is natural light. Maybe there's some lights, but usually what I do is I rent a bunch of lights and stuff like that, and then I never use them. You know? I rent them out of insecurity.
Yeah.
But there is something that when you light something, it's finite. When you use natural light, it's chaos, kind of. You know what I mean? Like.
But when you got a group of like 10 people, natural light it's a question. Is natural light and reflectors always enough? Don't you sometimes have to give it a little pop with a light?
If I had to light 10 people, it would ruin it. It would be, there's like a shadow going over someone's face. And then how would you ever handle that? Like, it's too hard.
How would I handle it?
Yeah, yeah.
I'd come up with a ratio that looks natural, but would fill in just enough.
You know, Tim, I love hearing this from you, because I mean, I am purely a natural light photographer, and I always feel like I'm maybe being lame or lazy because I'm not using lights, but I just don't like lights. I like the sun. And so I really love hearing this from you. It's like a little bit of validation, but also like your work, the light is beautiful. It's beautiful, you know,
Right.
And it's about managing the light and where's your light coming from. And I love hearing that you go there, you look to see where it's coming from. What am I going to be dealing with? I don't know. And it's really stressful. I totally relate to that, but it just feels better. I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, it's not like you're worried about like something malfunctioning or there's not a cord that doesn't work and then a strobe popping and it all looks artificial. I mean, obviously, like Seth is explaining a very knowledgeable way to pull it off, where I view all those things as like stressful and just another thing to break and confuse me. And then the other thing that's worse than setting up a light is tethering. You know what I mean? Like tethering.
I don't even know what that means.
yeah. No, you wouldn't know what that is. You can't tether your camera. But no, tethering is the worst thing. And then you're like looking at the screen and turning your back to the subject and stuff like that. Like I don't see it as a positive. You know what I mean?
Oh my God, people love that. I can't stand it.
Yeah, tethering is like the end of photography. Everybody's looking at your photo and stuff like that. And you're like, you're not supposed to look at that one. I'm just warming up. You know, I'm just like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want every image seen by the subject, you know.
Let me jump in real quick because we're getting to the top of the hour, and just in case we get kicked out, I want to say thank you, Timothy, for this wonderful presentation, and thank you everyone who came and engaged. Made for a really wonderful evening. Thank you, Saul, for putting this together. And so there's lots of links in the chat, and the recording will be up in a couple days.
Great. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Timothy.
Yeah, thank you again. So good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay creative.
Thank you.
You're all invited to the
Good night.
next events that are coming up. So take care.
All right. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.